Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. Go down, hit subscribe, please. Leave a comment if you want to leave a comment. Hit the notification bell so you can always tell when something new is coming up out on our channel. Go to our About section, represent.com. You can get t-shirts, Dutch Hunter Rendezvous, Legend of the Superstition Mountains, black and gray, long sleeve, short sleeve. You've heard it all before. Also, go out and go to Lust for Gold, a race against time. You can pick up the Blu-ray, the DVD, you can pick it up through download. They got posters, they got t-shirts, they got some other stuff, but they also have a sweepstakes, 4 days, 3 nights in the Superstition Mountains. You don't have to purchase anything to qualify in that very cool thing. So kind of sign up for that. Maybe Frank and I will see you out in the mountains if you're the winner, okay? So getting to this week, a lot of times we're doing these, I get different ideas, and it might be, hey, maybe I want to pull something from the Bark Notes, maybe I want to tell a story, maybe I want to do this, talk about a little of the history of this or that, and there's always 4 or 5 things circulating, some things I've already talked about or doing, and then as the week goes, I kind of see kind of where I feel as the stuff runs through my head. Usually by the time we get down to do this, I've kind of got 1 or 2 ideas of what I'm going to do. This week I was thinking about this guy. I knew his name was Kyle, like McKinnon or McKinnon or McKennedy, something like that. I'd met on a construction site, and I kind of remembered that. I thought that's kind of a neat story. So I was kind of working it through my head, kind of remembered, okay, when did I meet the guy and how we meet and everything. And I was trying to get it set, and then a lot of times I'm trying to work out when did this occur and kind of remember, because I really don't have nothing to refer to. And so I'm working it out of the events and where we met. And I'm like, and then I realized his name wasn't Kyle, it was Andy. So then I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It was like Andy McKinnon. And we met, I was working on the southeast side, I-17 in Cactus. There's a bunch of apartments there, and we were working on apartments there. He was a carpenter. We were building those out. This is probably 84, 85. I don't think it was 83 going back that far. So I'm thinking about 84. And so we're working on those apartments, and I'd met him and remembered him. He was 3 or 4 years older. Could have been a little older than that, maybe, than me, but kind of met him. We'd all sit around, whatever story of the apartments we're working on, and grab lunch when it was lunch break usually. He was one of those guys who usually just put his stuff down and just ate lunch wherever he was at. And I was working in the same building, the same area as him. So kind of got to know him a little bit there. Well, I left there. That wasn't for White's Brothers. I can't remember the name of the company. Anyways, from there I went down the road, and I ended up down on Olive and 51st Avenue, around 55th Avenue. Some apartments going in there, and some guys that let me know better wages. I think there was a little better benefits, that kind of stuff, and the work was better. And they just started up. And these were apartments going up. They were going to be furnished apartments. So they were doing a lot of detail work, a lot of finished carpentry work, shutters inside, a lot of little stuff. So I got on there, and I was working there, and I knew a few guys there. And then one day I'm working, and there was Andy, and I was like, hey dude, he kind of same thing, had just decided to move along down the line, which a lot of times that happened. And we started working there, and we'd grab lunch and talk. He was probably around 6'3", 6'4". He was one of those guys that had that kind of long legs, long arms, kind of this, and he had a very meticulous way of speaking. So it'd be like, hey guys, I'm gonna go work in the front room, and I'll work my way back to where you're at in about an hour. So his enunciation, everything's good. He had a little bit of a drawl. I believe he was from Oklahoma, and he'd worked in Texas and New Mexico. I never knew much about his personal life, really. Didn't get to know. There was only one thing I really learned about him, which I'll tell in a moment. But for the most part, just knew him from we'd talk about where we worked. He talked about different places he worked, talked about stuff. But at one point, we're talking about something, and I'd been out in the Superstitions, and I was talking to a couple guys I knew, and I think one of them might have went on a trip with me, and he asked about, like, what's the Superstition Mountains? So he kind of liked that kind of stuff. He liked ghost towns, and he kind of liked the history thing. And so he was like, yeah, you know, what's that all about? So we'd sit around talking about it a little, and we told him about our trip. And then he'd always ask questions, you know, well, if I was going to go out there. And then I think he made several trips. And then what he would do is he would come back and talk to me about it. Say, hey, I went in, what do you call that area? And that's First Water. And he'd say, okay, I went there, and I went by here, and I saw this. And we talk, and okay, you were in Garden Valley. Yeah, okay, that's what they call it. And then he would talk more about the trip. And he always kind of wanted to know the history stuff. I tried to turn him onto a couple books. That's when I found one of the few personal things I knew about him, is he had dropped out of school when he was 12 or 13. And that's when he'd started working. And I think it was for the family or something. But he was pretty much illiterate. He couldn't read or write really well. And so I didn't know this, and so there was no use in him reading books, because I was like, oh, here's a book, you know, I got a book or something you can borrow. And he just told me, you know, he waited till nobody was around and said, don't bother with the book. I can't read. I can't read well. So he would listen. Now, he could always retain stuff, so I would tell him about stuff, and he'd ask questions, and I would tell him stories and stuff, and he'd kind of retain it, and then he'd go in the mountains. Well, one time he came back out, and we're sitting there, and he just turned to me and said I was out. And he says, I found these holes. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he said, I found one. It kind of got uncovered, and I found there's more than one. But he said they look like post holes. They're middle of nowhere. And he said they went down about 2.5 feet, 3 feet. And he said the first one he found, then he kind of found the second one or third one. And then he went back and found one in the middle, something like that. And then he figured out what distance, and he found they were perfectly spaced, basically. And there was about 12, a dozen or so, in a straight line. And I said, does it go north, or is it? And he said, no, he says it kind of was not real north. It was, but he said, you know, they line up, but once he realized there was no more, he couldn't find any off the sides. He said, it's not like it was a corral. It was like they dug these post holes, about a dozen of them. And he said they're kind of squared, they're rounded, but they're kind of rounded in the corners. But he said they're dug down, and he said they filled them with like fist-sized rocks. He said there's not smaller rocks in them, there's not bigger rocks in them. It's about all the rocks are roughly the same size, and every hole was filled with these rocks. And he said each of the 12 had that, and he said he thought that was kind of weird, because why would you dig the post holes, fill them with rocks? And I said, I don't know. And he figured I would understand something about this and explain to him what their purpose was. And I said, no, I have no idea why they're not deep enough. I said, I don't know if they would why would they put those rocks in there? So he said, yeah, it was really kind of mystery to him. And I asked him where they're at. And this is the only time I ever made a trip with him was, he said, well, you want to go out and take a look at them? And I said, yeah, I'm kind of curious. I'd like to kind of see them, and we'll measure them out and kind of see what we think. So we got ready to go. Now, another thing I have to tell you about Andy was, sometimes you meet those big, tall, skinny guys, and they can eat. And most of us would have a sandwich, might have some chips, get something off the coach, have a soda. That man would have like 3-4 sandwiches like this. And he would literally, where you would take your lunch, spend about 10 minutes, 12 minutes eating, maybe 5-6 minutes smoking a cigarette, and then sitting around talking, letting your food settle. He spent that entire discussion as he's talking to you, just eating the whole time, because he just literally, I'd never seen someone eat that much lunch, then just get up and work. So that being said, done. So we made the trip. We went in on a First Water, and we go down, and we went over Bull Pass and down into Marsh Valley. We're out in that area, and there was an area that was kind of a little plateaued, and we were off the trail and all, and I was kind of like, what made you go over here? And he said, well, I'd been over there, and I'd been over there, and I've been over here, so I decided to walk around over here. So I was getting this logic that he would just go in the mountains to an area what we talked about, and then he just walked up and down through that area, just looking around for anything that interested him. And I realized that's kind of very cool and meticulous, but because he didn't have kind of any sense of, like, other than what I told him, who knows what he was walking over past. And he was kind of very lucky he found it. So we went to the first hole he found. He walked right up to it. And I looked at it, and he said he filled most of them in and kind of covered them up a little with some stuff. And he started showing them, and there was like 12 holes. There might have been more than that. And he had one where he'd kind of covered it up, but he left it empty, and I looked in it, and I was like, huh, it was kind of strange. And it was a straight hole, and it looked like someone had dug a post hole, but it didn't seem to be as deep enough, but I guess it would have been deep enough, 2.5 feet. But he had those rocks piled off to the side, and all of them, we went over to another one and started reaching and pulling them. The rocks were relatively always the same size, like they meticulously took these rocks. And I told him, I said, I can't give you any clue why someone would dig 12 consecutive holes across and do that. And then I asked him, how long did it take you to kind of figure this out and kind of work these out and figure all this out? And he said about 8-9 hours. So he spent, and I don't know how many of us would have had the patience at one time, but he spent the entire day going through, find all those holes, taking the rocks out of them, putting them back, kind of working it out, and then coming back out and then talking to me about it. So we went to another one, we pulled it out, and I found it totally confusing. And I told him, I said, I don't know why they would put the rocks in it. I said, I really have no idea. There's no charcoal, there was no ash, it wasn't deep enough. I wouldn't think it was a pit to cook in. I could come up with nothing. But he had a tape measure, and we decided to tape them. Each hole was just over 33 inches from center to center. And we were sitting there, and he said, that's, it's not even 3 feet. But it was dead on. I mean, each hole 33, and like I said, just a hair over. And then I told him varas are about 33 inches, give or take a little. Not as always a perfect accurate measurement, but that Spanish measurement was 33 inches and something. And I said they would have had like a stick or something for 33, and then they would have. And I said, that's probably what we're looking at, because I said that's kind of odd and very coincidental that they are that exact. But I said what purpose this could have been, how it could have been it couldn't have been for surveying that I could think of, having 12 straight holes just like that, what the purpose the holes would have made or anything like that. So we sat there, and I've over the years, kind of went back to it, but there's nothing I can come up with that would really have fit or filled that or kind of worked out that story or explained why someone went out there, took a post hole digger, if that's what they did, dug those holes, cleaned them out, put those rocks all the same size, collected them from all over, put them in, made sure it was a perfectly straight line and 33 inches, exactly center to center, each one was the same. So we finished that. It was getting kind of a little bit later, and I told him, I don't have a clue. I'm really sorry. I didn't know that. I'd work with him probably for another 4 or 5 months and then moved on. And then I ran into someone on a site a year or two later and found out that he had died. It wasn't a health thing. I believe it was an automobile accident or something, but he was a really good-natured guy. The thing that day, again, I'd like to mention was we were leaving, and he had his pack, and we sat down to eat, and I was kind of thinking, well, he's going to pull out these 2 3/7. The man took out an entire fried chicken, not legs, wings, not in pieces. Tinfoil, brought it out and opened it up, and it was a chicken. And I was just like, he had this entire chicken. And we sat there. He had probably 2-3 beers in there as well. I don't think I've ever eaten in the mountains on a day trip with someone quite like that, but an entire chicken. And he had this chicken, and he opened the tinfoil, and he had the beers sitting there, and the beers couldn't have been that cold by that point, but it was a nice day. And then he just sat there and kept eating that chicken, wrapped the bones up in that tinfoil, put it back in his pack. That is probably the reason, even though there is the mystery of what those holes could have been, and I don't know if any of us will ever know what that is unless we found the person who dug them and gave us some inexplicable reason. But I will never forget it, is that an individual pulling an entire cooked chicken out, unwrapping it like at the Thanksgiving table or something, like it's a turkey, and then just sitting there and meticulously eating every piece of meat off of it, wrapping it up, putting it in his pack, while drinking probably three, 4 beers that he had in his pack. I believe that's all he had in his pack, because his pack literally deflated after that. And yeah, I'll never forget that. So Andy McKinnon, whatever his name was, but really good guy. Enjoyed that trip. Only trip I ever made with him. I worked with him, like I said, another 3-4 months on that project before I moved on to another site. And then I ran into someone later, and we were just talking, and I said, hey, whatever happened to Andy? Remember Andy, big old tall Andy, you know? And he said, no, he died. And I think what it was an automobile accident, which is a shame. Something happens to a good guy like that, really nice guy. And kind of in hindsight, you know, years go by, you go, I wish I would have made a couple more trips with him, because he was a really good guy, real easy going and all that. So that's the story I got this week for everybody. Again, please subscribe. Hit the notification bell, pick up a t-shirt if you want, check out Lust for Gold, go down, sign up for that sweepstakes. Maybe Frank and I will waylay your camp or steal your stuff while you're sleeping at night. Who knows what'll happen. Dutch Hunter Rendezvous coming up. I believe it's the 5th, 6th, 7th of November this fall. So we'll get more on that and be talking more about that as we get on and closer to it. Thank you again for joining us on Chasing Legends, and we'll see you next week on Chasing Legends. Until then, take care. I'm Wayne Tuttle, and I'll see you then.